In my last vlog, Royal BC Museum, biggest story in British Columbia, what you need to know, I outlined the reason why the museum decided to close down its third floor with its most popular gallery, starting with Becoming BC, closed down, to be followed by the blockbuster just recently, last week, that the museum was to be demolished, yes, torn down, and a new museum built for $750 million. So that is why I wanted to do a last walk through the museum as it existed before it was to be closed down. You're viewing Travels with Lobo, now with the completion of my 35-part series, Thailand from the North, from my hometown of Victoria, British Columbia. Remember, a vlog is published every Friday. In this vlog, I'll be doing part 1 of Becoming BC, and that would be the early explorers. It starts with the ship of Captain Vancouver, HMS Discovery, and more. So let's start the walk with part 1 of Becoming BC. In April 1791, Captain George Vancouver departed from Great Britain on a mission to the northwest coast of North America. He and his crew, aboard HMS Discovery and HMS Chatham, spent 3 summers surveying and mapping the coast of what is now British Columbia. The ship, rigged with 3 masts, was just 29 meters long and classed as a sloop of war. She carried 10 cannons and 10 swivel guns. Officers and senior crewmen occupied the rear cabins, while the other seamen ate and slept amidship. A major part of Captain Vancouver's mission was to survey the coast of what is now British Columbia. His cabin that you're looking at right now was enlarged to accommodate this work. This, of course, is a replica, but this is where Captain Vancouver would have done his surveying, his thinking, and his plotting as to the next move. Captain Vancouver learned his craft while serving on 2 of Captain James Cook's voyages between 1772 and 1779. He then served in the West Indies before commanding the expedition to North America's northwest coast. A strict disciplinarian, Captain Vancouver cared for his crew and lost only 5 of 180 men during the 4-year voyage of over 105,000 kilometers. That was the Colonial Narrative as presented in the museum section Becoming BC. This is what happened recently. Just to emphasize the new narrative about colonialism, the statue of Captain Cook, which had stood in front of the Empress Hotel for so long, was torn down with indignation by protesters who threw the statue into the inner harbor.
Haven't we been down this dark road before? Don't we remember just where?
And yes, on top of the dome of the BC legislature is the statue of Captain Vancouver. And I think the only thing that saved him from being torn down was that, well, he's at the top of the legislature. So he's safe for now. In view of all this fervent anti-colonial activity, we hear with surprise the following announcement from the museum. The 3rd floor will be closed as of January 2nd, 2020. And that's why I'm doing these series of vlogs, starting with Becoming BC, and the first thing you see, HMS Discovery. And as you leave the ship right there, it's coming into view now, is a massive drawing of historical importance. To understand that drawing, first we look at a map of Vancouver Island with Victoria at the bottom. Victoria, capital of British Columbia and home of the Royal BC Museum and also my hometown. Nearby on the mainland is the city of Vancouver. The red dot is Yuquot, or Friendly Cove, first discovered by Cook in 1778, and then Captain Vancouver, revisited this historic spot in 1792. The area is known as Historic Nootka Sound. Remember, all the emphasis here is upon Captain James Cook and Captain George Vancouver, but don't forget, Yuquot, or Friendly Cove, had been occupied for over 4,300 years with First Nations people of the Nootka Sound region. Think about that. Recently, I viewed an 8-part series on Netflix called Taboo. The subject matter was about Nootka Sound, located on Vancouver Island. Nootka Sound was part of the traditional territory of the indigenous Nootka people. Captain James Cook was the first European explorer to set foot on Nootka Sound. That was in March 1778. The absurdity of colonialism, at least in today's context, is highlighted in this series Taboo because the father of the protagonist, James Delaney, held a deed to Nootka Sound in dispute with the East Indian Company. No mention of the indigenous Nootka people, but that's a topic for another time. Let's go back to Vancouver Island. And that is a narrative that definitely does not fit today's concept of colonialism. That massive drawing depicts Friendly Cove, or Yuquot, as seen through the eyes of the ship's artist. By God, this has got to be one of the most historic drawings in all of British Columbia, if not Canada. As you leave Her Majesty's ship Discovery, you walk towards a replica of Fort Victoria. Fort Victoria, that fort that was built by the Hudson Bay Company, an arm of the British government. Fort Victoria, founded right here in Victoria in 1843. In 1846, it became the Grand Depot and headquarters of the Hudson Bay Company trade in British territory west of the Rocky Mountains. In 1849, the first legislative assembly of the colony of Vancouver Island was established here. For the indigenous people, it was, well, Armageddon, I suppose, the end of a civilization, the beginning of colonial dominance. But it's something that happened over most parts of the world, particularly perpetrated by the Spanish and the British. In a confusing manner, because this is 1843, we walk a few steps and we see this exhibit, which throws us back to, well, 1778. Nearby, we see the early explorers who came by sea. First of all, Captain Cook, 1778. Another one was Captain Juan Francisco de la Bodega y Cuadra Molinido, 1775 and 1792 to 93. As you can see, the Spanish had simple names. His exploration outlined in red. And that brings us to the aforementioned Captain Vancouver, 1792 to 1794, and his route was quite extensive on the west coast, as you can see here. Yes, a major explorer, and no wonder the city of Vancouver, British Columbia, was named after him, but that wasn't the first city. The first city was Vancouver, Washington, on the Columbia River. European discovery of the Pacific Northwest by sea came 250 years after Columbus. The great captains, Chirikov, Quadra, Cook, and Vancouver, made detailed surveys of the region, but for each it seemed a remote, forbidding land. Still it lay on the fringes of 4 growing empires, and Britain, approaching simultaneously by land, made the greatest effort to chart and fortify the coast. By 1793, she had forced Spain away, Russia later withdrew on her own, and American claims were eventually resolved by diplomacy. Therefore, is it any wonder that it became known as British Columbia? The push for discovery not only came by sea but also by land, the first being Alexander Mackenzie, 1793. The two famous Americans, Meriwether Lewis and William Clark, 1805. Simon Fraser, 1805. His name, of course, is attached to the longest river in BC, which flows into the Pacific just near Vancouver. And there, on the right, David Thompson, 1807. Thompson explored on behalf of the Hudson Bay Company and the Northwest Company. This boggles the mind, but he mapped and traveled 1,700,000 square miles of the Canadian and American West, in the process journeying some 50,000 miles by canoe, by horse, and on foot. That's why I call him the ultimate traveler. But he was doing more than traveling. A nearby plaque acknowledges First Nations knowledge and advice contributed to the early mapping of British Columbia's coastline. With the help of native guides, maritime explorers from many nations contributed to cartographic knowledge. Among other things, the explorers were searching for the fabled Northwest Passage, because the present trip was 20,000 kilometers around Cape Horn, the tip of South America. Thank you for joining me in this initial peek into the museum entitled Becoming BC. In next week's vlog, that would be next Friday, I'll be looking at the early industries that developed in Becoming BC, one of them, of course, being the fur trade, another one being gold mining, fishing, etc. So that's what I'll be looking at next week. Thank you for joining me. See you next Friday.